In this second video on probability, I'm going to talk about some of the complications that you can get into with probability problems. Probability problems can get trickier when there's more events. So far, we've only talked about one event. Let me give you some examples. Rolling two or more six-sided cubes would be more than one event. Flipping two or three or four coins. Spinning a wheel twice, picking two balls from a jar. Those are all examples where there's more than one selection being made. Now, the key idea that we're going to use for problems with more than one event is to multiply the probabilities together. Let me give you some examples of that. So let's say the question was, what is the probability of picking a red ball from a jar and then another red ball from that jar? We're going to calculate that by multiplying the probability of that first event, the first red ball, with the probability of getting the second red ball. When we take the product of those two probabilities, it will give us our answer. Other examples, the probability of getting a head when flipping a coin, and then when flipping it again, getting a tail. So we'll multiply the probability that the first is a head with the probability that the second flip is a tail. Finally, the probability of rolling threes on a dice, 3 threes. So we're going to multiply three things together this time because there are three events. We are going to roll one dice, we'll roll another dice, we'll roll a third dice. We'll just multiply the probability of those all together to get the answer. We'll be going through some examples of this. First, a note about multiple events. Rolling two six-sided cubes may sound like one thing. We're just doing one thing. We're rolling these two cubes. Or selecting two marbles from a jar might also sound like we're just doing one thing. But we need to think of these each as two events. One is happening after the other. So for the cubes, we think about rolling one cube, something's going to happen, and then we roll the second one. That's how we get those two probabilities that we're going to multiply together. With the marbles, the same thing. We're going to pick one, and then we're going to pick the second one, even though it says selecting two marbles. So, as I said before, roll the first cube, then roll the second. Those are the two events. Pick one marble and then select another. Two events. Steps for calculating the probability with more than one event. I've already talked about this, but we're going to go through this step by step now with an example. What is the probability of flipping a coin and getting two heads in a row? We find the probability of the first event, the probability of flipping a coin and getting a head. In this example, that is 1/2. There's one head on a coin, and there's two sides. So the nice thing about coins is that the probability of getting a head will always be 1/2. The probability of getting a tail will always be 1/2. The probability for coins are always the same, which makes them kind of easy to work with. Number two, what's the probability for the second event? The probability that the second is ahead is also 1/2. It will always be 1/2 for a coin. So now we have the probability of our two events. If we had a third, fourth, fifth event, we would have to find those probabilities, but that doesn't apply. In this case, we just have two events. Now we multiply those probabilities together using a calculator, if necessary. In this example, it's 1/2 times 1/2 to give us our answer of 1/4. You will want to try to reduce that probability if you can, but we can't in this case. So our answer would be 1/4. Hopefully that makes sense. We're multiplying these together because we have a probability for each event. Let's take a look at probability questions that might involve two different kinds of events. You can see we have a jar full of marbles. We have a dice. Our example is, what is the probability of selecting a gray marble from the jar and then rolling a 2 on the dice? And you may say, what do those two things have to do with each other? And they really don't have anything to do with each other, but it is an example of the kind of question that you might see. We're going to do the same thing that we did before. We're going to find the probability of the first event. The first event is picking a marble, and we're interested in gray marble. And we can see that there's one gray marble, and there's a total of 8 marbles in this jar. So the probability of a gray marble is 1 out of 8. The probability of the second event, the probability of getting a 2 on the dice is 1 out of 6. There's 1, 2 on a 6-sided dice, and there's 6 sides. So 1 out of 6. Dice are a little bit like coins in that if we're interested in the probability of any number on this dice, the probability will always be 1 out of 6. Now we need to do the thing where we find the probability of third and fourth, etc., if we need to, but we don't. We just have 2 events. We multiply those probabilities together. 1/8 times 1/6 equals 1 over 48. That's the answer to this question. So for a probability involving multiple events, make sure you're multiplying a probability of each event. Sometimes the probability of the second event will change after the first event. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, but we will try to get through this. What is the probability of selecting 2 blue marbles? And it's telling us that we should assume we don't replace the first marble. So let's find the probability of the first event. This is no different. The jar is the same. We're picking a marble. The probability that it's blue, we have 2 blue marbles. We have a total of 8 marbles. That's going to be 2 out of 8. We don't have to worry about reducing this because we're going to multiply at the end. But the probability that the first marble is blue is 2 out of 8. Now, what we need to do is assume that we took one of those marbles out. So one of the blue marbles is gone. What's the probability for the second event? Now, hopefully you can see how the fact that we have removed a blue marble from this jar changes the probability that the second one is blue. There's only 1 blue marble left, and there's only 7 marbles left. So the probability that the second is blue is 1 out of 7. Once again, we don't need to find a third or a fourth event, and we multiply the probabilities together. We've done the hard part here. Let's multiply them together. 2 over 8 times 1 over 7 is 2 over 58, and that can be reduced to 1 over 49. That's the answer to that question, but we needed to make an adjustment for the second event because we did not replace that marble, and it changed the probability for the second event. All right, let's move on. We're almost done here. I just want to do one slightly bigger example here that demonstrates a lot of the things that I just talked about. Angie spins a wheel. She rolls a dice, and she selects a marble. What is the probability that she spins a 1, rolls an even number, and selects a blue marble? There's 3 things happening here. So we should be thinking in terms of multiplying 3 probabilities together. The probability of a 1, the probability that that is an even number, and the probability that this is blue. So let's find each one of those and then multiply. The probability of a 1 on the spinning wheel, there's only 1, 1, and there's 6 spaces. So that will be 1/6. On a dice, we've got 6 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we have 3 even numbers, 2, 4, and 6. So our probability of that being even is 3/6. And then finally, let me change my color again. We've got the marbles, and we're interested in blue marbles. There are 2 blue marbles, and there are a total of 8 marbles. So we're carefully finding the probability of each one of these, and then we simply multiply them together. Now, if I do this manually, I'm going to say 1 times 3 times 2, that's 6 on the top of our fraction. And then 6 times 6 times 8, 288. And then we can try to reduce this fraction, and we find out that that reduces to 1/48. And that's our answer. So I hope that was helpful. I know that that was a lot. Please go back and review the video again if you'd like to slow it down and take your time with it and try to follow along. And then when you're ready, proceed to the practice. Good luck.